giftedness isn't like, oh, you won the genetic lottery. It's your brain is wired differently. And there's this really good positive side to it, but it's unrealistic for us to expect that that's all there is because that brain is wired differently than the quote unquote norm.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber, and in today's episode, we are going to be exploring profound giftedness. I've done a few podcasts about giftedness as a neurodifference in the past, and I've certainly talked a lot about twice exceptionalities, but today I wanted to explore those children who are considered profoundly gifted, which means these are children who score at least 3 standard deviations above the norm on the bell curve. So they are at the extreme end of the intelligence or the IQ continuum. As you can imagine, profoundly gifted children have unique educational and social emotional needs. So today I'm talking with 2 experts from the Davidson Institute, a U.S.-based organization that offers support to profoundly gifted young people through programs and services. My guests are Dr. Stacy Hawthorne, the Director of Online Learning for the Davidson Academy Online, and Dr. Jessica Potts, a teacher at the Academy. Stacy and Jessica have extensive experience serving this population of unique learners. So today, they're going to share with us their insights and best practices for how to identify and support profoundly gifted children. Before I get to our conversation, a few quick announcements. First, I wanted to give a quick shout out to podcast supporter Dawn Dockney. Thank you so much for being a part of this community and for helping support the production costs for this show. And if you too get a lot out of Tilt Parenting and would like to make a small monthly contribution to help fund the show, it's really easy to do. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting and sign up. You can pledge $10, $5, or even just $2 a month. Again, that's patreon.com/tiltparenting. Okay, and now here is my conversation with Stacy and Jessica of the Davidson Institute. Hey, Stacy and Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
I haven't done a ton of episodes with 2 guests, but I always think it's kind of fun and a little challenging, but we'll just kind of go with it. I know you both bring different expertise to this. So before we dive into the content, can you just take a minute to introduce yourselves? Maybe Stacy, start with you, and then Jessica.
Perfect. Thanks. So I'm Stacy Hawthorne. I am the Director of Online Programs for the Davidson Academy and the Davidson Institute. I'm currently working on my doctorate in the field of online learning for gifted education. So this is a really exciting job for me because it matches what I'm interested in studying and my research passions as well. I'm also the parent of 2 profoundly gifted students who are now adults, and I've been a gifted teacher before. So I've had this experience as a mom, as a teacher, as an administrator, and it's just nice to be able to see what good education does for our gifted students today.
And my name is Jessica Potts, and I'm an English instructor and the curriculum coordinator at Davidson Academy Online. I've been with the Davidson Academy, both brick and mortar and online, for 11 years, and I absolutely love working with this population. My PhD is also in gifted education and online learning, and it's a neat little niche area that's just kind of now being explored. So a lot of my research centers around that intersection of gifted education and online education. And I'm really happy to be talking about these kids today.
And for people who aren't familiar, can you just take a minute to tell us about the Davidson Institute for people who may not have heard of it before, and Davidson Academy?
Yep. So I'll start, and then Jessica, feel free to add in anything else. The Davidson Institute was started by Bob and Jan Davidson about 20 years ago or so now, and it is an organization that provides support services for students ages 5 through 18 and their families that have a qualifying score. So we're looking for students that are 3 standard deviations above the norm on an achievement or an IQ test. And those services include summer programs, family consultants, counseling services. They'll advocate for families to help them find gifted opportunities in their local area, connect other similar families together so that they can do outings, create their own schooling situations and things like that. So it's a completely free program unless you want to attend one of the in-person events, and there is a cost for that. But the majority of stuff that they offer is free. Out of that institute, a lot of folks came to Bob and Jan Davidson and asked them, hey, will you start a school? You really understand this population. And so they entered into a partnership with the University of Nevada in Reno to start a public school for profoundly gifted students, which is the Davidson Academy. It targets the same student population as the Institute does. It is completely free public school for students that live anywhere in the state of Nevada. And for students that live outside of the state of Nevada and join our online campus, there is a fee to offset some of the cost of running that program. So it doesn't cover the full cost of running that program, but it does help offset some of the costs. We do have students in the online campus that live in the Reno area. We have students that live in the Las Vegas area. All of those students attend tuition free because of our situation as a public school with the state. And the online campus has been here this is our third full year for the full-time online high schools. Jessica, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think you covered the vast majority of it. On the school end of it, both the brick and mortar school and the online school, our students have the benefit of being grouped according to their abilities and readiness as opposed to their age or grade. So students who are ready to accelerate past what regular education schools might have allowed them to do are able to move at a pace that's appropriate for their abilities. And that's wonderful for the students, and it's also wonderful for the teachers because we are able to meet the students exactly where they are and help them to maximize their potential.
I had no idea that the Davidson Institute was a free public school. That's incredible. And I imagine, do you have people who move to Nevada just to be able to attend the school?
Most do. Most do, yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what I would love to, just as a way to make sure that listeners are really understanding this population we're talking about, can we talk about, or maybe you explain what it means to be profoundly gifted? I mean, you mentioned 3 standard deviations, either on an IQ test or a standardized test, but tell us more about this particular population and perhaps how it's differentiated from quote unquote traditional gifted or what we more recognize as being gifted in most school systems.
So as Stacy mentioned, profoundly gifted students are identified usually using standardized exams. So things like IQ tests or other achievement tests. And when we're talking about IQ scores, there's a lot of deviation in like what that number should be to identify profoundly gifted students. There are some researchers who say that anything over 150 is profoundly gifted. There are some who give a percentage, like for example, one that's a stat that's cited most often is 0.1% of the population is considered profoundly gifted. So it's the very, very top percentage. But there is a lot of deviations there depending on who you are talking to. But the thing that we should note is the difference between, like you said, more traditional gifted students and profoundly gifted students is pretty vast. It's as vast as the difference between regular education students and that traditional gifted students. So they're extreme in their abilities. They're able to move at a pace much faster than even regular gifted students. And they may have intensities in that they are very, very interested in one thing or another, whether it's math or science or English. And they do tend to develop asynchronously. So they may have extreme strengths in one area, and they may just be in a more regular gifted level for other areas.
Yeah, and I want to add 2 things onto what Jessica just said. So we take a range, both the Institute and the Academy, look at a range of IQ tests and achievement tests, and those are posted on our website. It's not just one test that we say identifies giftedness. We also look for students to have taken a test with an individually administered test, and that way they get the opportunity to work with a tester or a psychologist that's doing the testing that understands that student a little bit better than in a mass testing situation and can identify the test that's best suited for that student's strengths. So we really want them to have a good testing experience and take that individualized test, and we take a variety of them. The other thing that I wanted to add is that we also know that a test score doesn't tell the whole picture of a student. So both of our applications, whether you're applying for the institute or the academy, uses a holistic review of the application. So we'll look at those test scores, we'll look at teacher recommendations, we'll look at different things that the student's interested in, and we also look for any exceptionality. So we'll look if a student has a Section 504 plan or an IEP plan. We'll take all of that information into account when we review the application. So it's not just, do you have a 145? Then, yes, you're qualified to be here. It's really, what is the whole picture when we put all that together say about this student and where they're performing at, and are they at the level that we would fit in with our existing student?
You mentioned Jessica was talking about the asynchronicities, which I know, that's a trademark for many differently wired kids, especially gifted. And I'm assuming even more so perhaps in profoundly gifted kids. I'm just wondering, are kids more likely to have other sort of, neuro differences, learning disabilities, or other differences going on the higher they may be in other cognitive abilities? Like, is there a connection between those intensities or those other challenges and having a really high IQ?
It's not my area of expertise, so I don't think I could give you some solid numbers. But what I could say is that oftentimes with gifted students and profoundly gifted students, we don't see some of those twice exceptional challenges until the students have been properly challenged academically. So students who do have some twice exceptionality could do an excellent job in a regular education setting, or even in, a traditional gifted education setting. Their atypicalities might not show up. However, once we do get students into places where they are extremely challenged, if there are any atypicalities, they might become more apparent. I don't know if it's more likely to show up in this profoundly gifted range. Stacy, maybe you have some better numbers on that?
Yeah, so I have two things. One, I can't give a generalized number. I can tell you that with our admissions process and with our students, currently about 20% of those students that we have at the online campus, we would consider 2E students. So it's about 20%. And very early on in my gifted teaching career, I attended a professional development session of that. And I wish I could remember her name because I would love to give her credit on your podcast, but I don't remember it because it was a long time ago. But I attended a workshop from a psychologist who specialized in working with gifted adults. And one of the things that I learned from that workshop that really stuck with me is people that are gifted, children, adults, that giftedness is essentially, by a really broad definition, a disability. Your brain is wired differently. There just happens to be a really good upside. If somebody was the same number of standard deviations below the norm, you would definitely provide support services for them. But her point in saying that was, it's unrealistic for us to expect, just because there's this huge positive benefit of how your brain is wired differently, that there isn't some kind of, other anomaly that goes along with it. So whether that's an overexcitability, some kind of autism, some other exceptionality that doesn't have as good of a positive side to it. So once I heard her talk, and it really helped me to understand, like, okay, giftedness isn't like, oh, you won the genetic lottery. It's your brain is wired differently. And there's this really good positive side to it, but it's unrealistic for us to expect that that's all there is, because that brain is wired differently than the quote unquote norm.
Yeah, I remember, and I've shared this with listeners in a previous episode, but I remember the first time a parent coach said to me that giftedness is a special need in its own right. And that was, I'd never thought of it that way before, but I also think that is an aspect that a lot of parents may not get understanding from other parents about, because right. There is this, stigma, for lack of a better word, against even the label gifted, and certainly profoundly gifted, I'm sure elicits many an eye roll. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I can, if you don't mind me starting, Jessica.
Go ahead.
we just had we have a retreat every summer for our online students. So the ones that want to come in, they come into Reno, they spend a weekend, we get to know each other. We have just a really good time. And we went to a pizza place here in town for dinner one night, and we had pre-ordered our food because there's a group of 30 of us coming. And I got up to the front of the line to pay, and I paid with my credit card, and it says Davidson Academy on it. And the gentleman that was helping us from the other side of the counter said, "Oh, I've seen the Davidson Academy here. What is it?" And I said, "Well, it's a public school for profoundly gifted students." And he responded back to me and said, "Well, we certainly need more of that in our society today." And there was a couple that was standing next to me on my side of the counter, and the woman rolled her eyes and said, "That's the last thing we need any more of." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, would you say that if there was a school for students with disabilities that needed special education because they weren't able to access the general curriculum?" And she said, "No, that's very different." No, it's not different. It's exactly the same thing. And so it really frustrated me. And I felt like I needed to try to educate her just a little bit, because I'm in there with 25 of our students and their parents, and we're all having pizza. And she said, "That's the last thing these kids need." Mm-hmm. And it really is, you wouldn't deny a type of education that brings students up to, that meets them at their level on a special education side of the, continuum. So why is it, elitist to do that on the gifted end of the spectrum? Giftedness doesn't just fall, to rich white kids' children. It crosses all boundaries. It crosses gender. It crosses race. We need to do a better job of identifying giftedness in more diverse areas than a lot of schools do. But it's not just, an elitist privilege. It can happen to anybody, just like anybody, could have a student that has a disability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stacy, you bring up the word elitist, and we do hear that bandied about quite a bit when we're talking about gifted education, unfortunately. But as both of you have pointed out, this is a neuroatypicality. And a lot of times funding for gifted education is housed under the same umbrella as special ed. So where the money goes, we can guess where the money is going to go. It's usually going to wind up heading towards special education classes and special education needs. However, if we take a look at the Individuals with Disability Education Act, this act stated that special education students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. And if gifted students are considered under that same umbrella as special ed students and they use the same funding, then they too are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. And right now, in most public education settings, the education that gifted students are getting is not appropriate. It's that, free is obviously important, but the big important letter is the A. It's appropriate. So we have to find educational settings that are appropriate for these kids. It's their right under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
We'll be right back after this quick break. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off.
Yeah, and we have several students, not just a student, but we have one who came to us, and at his local school, the highest level math that they would let him take because of his age was geometry. And at the time, he was 12, just turning 13. And like Jessica said early on, we do all of our placements based on ability, not on age or grade or anything like that. And so we let him take placement tests, and he ended up placing into our advanced calculus course. And by the age of 13, he scored 5s on both the AP calculus exams, and he scored 5s on the physics C exams, AP exams as well. But had he stayed at his local school, they would have said, no, you need to be in geometry. Well, clearly he didn't need to be in geometry.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, hearing your stories, I just pulled up an article that just came out here. I'm talking to you from New York City, and there was a controversial plan just announced earlier this week to eliminate all gifted and talented programs on kindergarten, middle school, and high schools across the city to try to address some of the inequality problems happening throughout the school system. But, what you just said about the calculus example, it shows, really what these kids need and what they would be missing out on. Can you talk a little bit more about the unique challenges when it comes to educating profoundly gifted kids?
Okay, yeah, being one of the classroom teachers, I can say that when you first come into a classroom with profoundly gifted students, it can be a little intimidating because these guys are super quick. They're obviously very smart, and they're very eager to learn. Some of them who are coming into these situations for the first time are hungry for knowledge. They're so eager to be able to work with their intellectual peers. And so you have to figure out what kind of pacing is appropriate for them. You have to find out what they already know. And because they do tend to move very quickly and they have interests that are kind of divergent, you have to also find out if there's any holes in their understanding and work to fill those in. So one of the things that we do at Davidson Academy and Davidson Academy Online is we have a diagnostic period at the beginning of the school year. So the first 2 to 3 weeks of the school year are a chance for us to get to know our students as individuals, get to see what their education has been like, what they know how to do already. Like, can we bypass some things so we have the flexibility to be able to do that? Where do we need to slow down and maybe fill in some of those gaps? And also, what are our students' interests? So if they have specific interests that we can tailor the curriculum to a little bit, we try to do that. And so after those first 2 or 3 weeks, we have a much better idea of what each of our classes look like. And these classes will move at different paces. They'll move according to students' needs. And we check in with our students regularly and see if things need to be altered and see if we can do a better job for our individual students. So no 2 classes are exactly the same. No 2 classes from year to year are exactly the same. So I guess that's one of the challenges as teachers is we always have to be assessing and making changes and trying to fit things to the needs of our students. But that's also kind of a blessing because we're able to be creative and be flexible and have a lot of autonomy in the classroom while simultaneously meeting the needs of the students.
Yeah, and Jessica, I'll just add one of the challenges really with our student population is they're exceptionally bright. but not exceptionally. You mentioned earlier asynchronous development, not exceptionally bright in all areas. So, for example, I talked about the student that was 13 and with his calc exam scores and his physics exam scores, he's in one of our grade appropriate English and history courses because that's not his relative strength compared to the others. And the other thing, too, is our students ask a lot of really deep questions. They feel comfortable to ask questions. And so it takes a really special teacher like Dr. Potts, who's willing to have students ask questions that she may not always be able to answer. And then lastly, we also have to remember that no matter how intelligent they are still 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 15-year-olds, and they're going to make those same mistakes, and they need that same kind of loving, supportive environment that's going to say, nope, you may be smarter than this adult, but that's not how we address other people. And so they need some coaching on how to be human beings. Just because they're smart doesn't mean they, have social and emotional maturity. Sometimes they need a little bit of help with that. It's something that teachers always have to remember a lot. I had a colleague come in to one of the Davidson Young Summits. She was going to be doing some work with us, and I wanted her to meet, our profoundly gifted student population and try to get a flavor for what working with this population was like. And I asked her at the end of the weekend, tell me, what are your takeaways? What's the big thing that you learned from this weekend? And she said, the number one thing I learned was nobody changed the words or the tones with which they spoke when a child was in the room. So you use the same vocabulary as if you were speaking to another adult, and you didn't change the tone like they were a child. You talked to them like they were intellectually equal, but you also had to understand that, they were going to interrupt you because they didn't know it was socially appropriate to wait until the adult was talking or things like that. So she said that was her big takeaway.
Super interesting. And I can completely relate to that. So, I'm wondering, I imagine some of these kids too, especially if they're transferring in from other environments where they probably have always been the smartest kid in the class or really haven't been challenged. Do you get students coming to the school who maybe are fierce perfectionists or maybe are resistant to even the concept that there might be a knowledge gap there? And if so, how do you get them to kind of have more of a growth mindset in those areas?
Yeah. So my philosophy is if a student is applying to come to Davidson Academy, whether it's the Reno campus or the online campus, something is not working for them in their local education setting. Because if they were getting educated at an appropriate level in their local community and mom and dad could just put them on a bus in the morning and they came home in the afternoon and everything was perfect, they wouldn't be applying to go somewhere else. So I always labor under the assumption that something's not working for them locally. And so that's why they're coming to us. So that tells me that, typically, and as a parent, and you may be able to relate to this too, Debbie, these parents have had to advocate for every little challenge their students have had. They've had to fight with schools. They've had to fight with teachers. They've had to justify that why their student needs, to go into the next grade level, and heard all kinds of reasons why that's not good for their kid, but yet they know what it is. So we always approach the situation to try to build trust with that family, to establish we're in this as your partner. We want to push your student as far ahead as we can. But sometimes they want them to go farther than we think they're ready to go. So we've had students, this actually happens most frequently in Texas, not to knock on any single education system. It happens other places. That have taken the algebra course there or the algebra 2 course in the state and passed the TEKS and done very well and made an A in that class, but they can't pass our placement exam to get out of that course. And what we try to explain to parents is this is the first time that all the curriculum is specifically geared to students that are like yours. It's not a general algebra course that they're trying to get everybody through. Ours is a very deep course that really studies the philosophy behind the math. The students understand the why and not just the how to do the math. In our English courses where Dr. Potts instructs, there's a lot of critical and analytical thinking skills. It's not just write a 5-paragraph essay and, write a story and do those kind of things. And so the biggest adjustment that students have when they first come to us is learning how to be the average student. And we tell parents in the interview process, this will be the worst adjustment that your student has is for the first time in their life, they're not going to be the smartest kid in the room every single minute of the day. Mm-hmm. They will be at some point of the day, but somebody else is going to be smarter than them before or after that as well. And so we really try to gear parents up for that. And we try to gear them up to understand that, it's okay to work with us and to trust us. We never want to hold a student back, but we also don't want to put them in a situation where they're not capable of being successful. So if we do our placements right, and if that diagnostic period works out right that Dr. Potts was mentioning earlier, then every student should be able to work and achieve to earn an A in the course. But they should have to work and achieve for that. And if they can't get an A, then we put them in a course that was too hard. And if they get an A without having to do anything, we put them in a course that was too easy. So that's what that diagnostic period is really about. And once they get through those first 2 or 3 weeks, they really start to appreciate that. But it is a tough adjustment those first 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. I bet. Jessica, did you have anything to add to that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I agree with everything that Stacy said. And I think it's really prevalent in the English courses because, like she mentioned, a lot of these students do not come in with the same level of instruction or the same type of instruction. A lot of students have only been given instruction in creative writing or writing narratives. A lot of them have never had instruction in analytical writing, which is what we ask them to do. And so when they come in and we're giving them all of these comments on their papers, they're a little shocked because they're used to earning 100% without any comments, and it's just a gold star and an A and you're out the door. So when we are asking them to do something else and to rethink and to revise, it can be a little bit of a shock, but we are always there with them. We are there to support them. We walk them through everything. They have lots and lots of opportunities to revise. So we're really big on process in this school, having opportunities to take intellectual risks and to fail well. And I don't mean fail as in like earn an F, but fail as in to like make mistakes and to figure out how to do it better the next time and to revise and to change and to rethink. And there's a couple different effects, like research effects that we talk about when we're looking at gifted students' shifts into gifted education. The first one is called the big fish in the little pond effect. So these students are always used to being the big fish. They're used to being the smartest kid in the room. And when they shift, they have to, like Stacy said, get used to being the average sized fish. But they're swimming with other fish who can swim at the same pace that they're swimming at. And once students get used to the kids around them, we shift into a different effect. It's called the basking in reflected glory effect. So they realize that everyone around them is also shining and that this is their opportunity to shine as well. And they rise to the occasion. And when we see both of those effects happening in that order, then usually we have a student who winds up quite happy to be in this different pond with a different set of fish.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
I'd like to hear a little bit about the online school. So I'm wondering, is that something that's a primarily homeschooling resource, or what kind of students are attending that? And also, how do you replicate the same system? I imagine it's just different being online versus in person.
Yeah, it's different. And in some ways, we actually have a student that attends the online campus that lives here in Reno. And she thinks it's better than going to the in-person school. But we have more students that live in Reno that go to the in-person school than online, obviously. But the thing that's really important for us with the online program is one of the research-based benefits of gifted education for gifted students is the opportunity to interact with their intellectual same-age peers. And that's what's really special when you walk into the Reno campus. You just see this whole community of gifted learners just being themselves and really enjoying themselves. One of our students the first year, when I asked him what he liked about being a Davidson Academy online student, and he said to me, for the first time in my life, I get to be myself all day long, because when he went to another school, he had to pretend to be somebody else during the day so he could hide his giftedness. And so we wanted to really emulate that in the online campus. And so one of the things that's the hallmark of what we do is our online live sessions. So for every single core course, students meet live online using Zoom video conferencing with their web camera, with their audio on, for 3 hours a week, 2 90-minute sessions where they're interacting with their classmates and having conversations about the content area, so that they really get that opportunity to have that rich discourse and intellectual discussion with an instructor there, but with their classmates. Dr. Potts, do you want to talk about what it looks like in one of your classes when you're having a live session?
Sure. Yeah, we try our best to replicate the same kind of practices as you would have in a brick and mortar school, so that the students come in, we chat, we socialize, we get to really know our students. We go over their homework. We're able to help them through questions. We can workshop. So we can break students into small groups where they can workshop each other's papers live on video with their papers right in front of them. We have discussions. We can do debates. We can work through math problems together. We can watch videos. We can do science experiments. Anything that you can do brick and mortar, you can replicate online. The only difference is that you're not in the same space. So the physical proximity thing is different. And maybe the energy feels a little bit different. But I have to say, after teaching online, this is my 5th year online, I do know these students. I know them as people. We have jokes, we make jokes together. We know each other's personalities. We know our strengths. We know our weaknesses. It's a real community. And I will echo Stacy and say that I think the synchronous sessions are the hallmark of our program. I think it's something that we do better than just about anybody else out there. Students have experienced online classes where there is no synchronous session, where it's only discussion boards or chat boards or things like that. And they will say that the synchronous sessions are the things that they like best about our school.
Very cool.
Debbie, I want to go back and answer the first part of your question, because I realized I got so excited talking about live sessions that I forgot that. The Davidson Academy online campus is a public school. We are the same school as the Davidson Academy Reno campus. It is a full-time school. The majority of students are home during the day. They're taking our classes full-time. We do require a minimum of 5 classes. They are still doing things in the local community. As much as we love online learning, we do think they need to turn their computer off and get outside as well. But it really depends on the age of the students. Some students, if they're older, are home alone. I know we have a couple of students that go to work with mom during the day, and there's a place at their mom's office where the student can take their live sessions. Occasionally, students can take live sessions if they're traveling somewhere or going between appointments, but we really want them to treat this as if it is their main school and they're in a safe standard desk place, whether they have a standing computer or a sitting computer, but there's a quiet place where they call it their school. Students over the years we have one student that's painted the walls in his bedroom to Davidson Academy colors so that he has a nice background when he's on his live session and things like that. They'll put different things up behind them, and they do that. And then just this year, we, for the first time, have started to offer 2 a la carte courses. So you could take one of our English courses or one of our math courses, and those live sessions happen a little bit later in the afternoon, so the students could go to another school during the day and then take one of those. But the majority of our students are full-time students. The a la carte courses, those single courses, those students are in their own live session. They're actually not intermingled with our full-time students. And that's deliberate because our full-time students told me that they don't want single course students in there because they spend so much time collaborating with their classmates that they were worried that if a student was just taking a single course, they weren't going to be as invested in their learning and weren't going to be around for clubs and all of those other things that make it a quote unquote real school.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for circling back to that. So if there are parents who are listening to this, and I guess this is a 2-pronged question. One is if they suspect their child is profoundly gifted, what do you recommend they do? Like, how do they start to determine if that's what's going on? And then I'd like to hear also how they can learn more about Davidson and get connected and apply for the program.
Yeah, so the first step is they're going to probably want to get some testing. And sometimes they may take a Iowa test of basic skills or a COGAT in their local school, and that will give them kind of a baseline to show where they're at. And if they think that there's something there, it's worth talking to a local tester or psychologist. There's lots of testing centers. There are websites where you can Google search, testing for gifted students and find somebody reputable in your area. The Davidson Institute's website, which is davidsongifted.org, has some resources for parents on there as well. And then once you have that confirmation, you can apply to either one of our programs. For information on the Davidson Institute, the best way to get a hold of them is info@davidsongifted.org. And then if you're interested in the Davidson Academy, whether it's the online campus or the Reno campus, I'll give you our easy email address is online@davidsongifted.org. And that would go to me. And I can, if you're interested in the Reno campus, I can certainly forward that along. But info@davidsongifted.org is the Institute, and online@davidsongifted.org would be for either the Reno or the online campus, if you're interested in more information.
Very cool. And I will, listeners, as always, I will include links in the show notes page for this episode so you can easily click through and learn more. I just have one kind of last question because I'm just curious. Assuming the trajectory for these kids is not typical, and you probably have some great stories of some of the extraordinary things that these kids are doing and when they are supported and are able to share their gifts with the world. So I don't know, could you maybe share an example of the kinds of things that are possible for a profoundly gifted child when they're supported and able to really thrive and learn the way they learn?
Yeah. I'll share one. We have a student who did his first year with us at the online campus. He's back now for his 3rd year. At the end of his first year, he was around 7th grade by age. His mom contacted me and asked if he could take a gap year. And I was a little taken aback by that because he's, middle school by age and he's ready for a gap year already. And I said, well, let's talk, what's up? And it turns out that he wrote a letter to a local university where he lives and talked to a professor and told him that he was really interested in neuropsychology. And the professor was very impressed by his letter and invited him to spend the summer studying with his graduate students. And so it worked out really well. And so the professor invited him, he's 13 years old, to come back and spend the rest of the year studying with the undergraduate students for a full year. And so the mom wanted him to be able to take a gap year to do that because it was such a unique opportunity for him. And we were able to customize his schedule because he started early. One of the things we encourage folks, if they're interested in a Davidson Academy education, to start early so that they can do things like this. So he was already earning high school credits because of some of the courses that he was taking. So we were able to adjust his schedule so that he could work with that professor in that lab. He now has his own research website at the university website. He's listed as an intern for the professor. He's now 14 years old. And so, we were able to do his schedule in such a way that he could continue his university studies, but still get his English and his history instruction with us and his math instruction with us. And so, it was just a really neat story that at 13, he's ready for a gap year, but we were able to help facilitate that. But the Reno campus is one of their most famous alumni. Was the youngest student ever to build a nuclear fusion or fission. I'm not sure. I'm not a scientist. A reactor in his garage. So those are the kind of kids that we have. But we also have students that do amazing things in music and art. So it's not just always math or science that our students excel at.
I was going to mention that student as well. It's fusion, if I'm remembering correctly.
Nuclear fusion. Okay, just so we're clear. Yeah.
Right. And he actually earned funding from the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Energy to continue working on nuclear detection. So that's one end of the spectrum. But we have a handful of kids who have earned fellowships, who have Fulbrights and have traveled the world. One of our students is now working for some government agency, I can't remember which, but she's researching China, and she's lived in China. She speaks Chinese. We have a bunch of students who have visited China and Taiwan and the Koreas, and they were able to do some research into these cultures and have learned the language along the way. They're doing amazing things. We have a student who owns a yoga studio. We have one who's in a successful punk rock band. We have some they have their own radio programs. So it's not just fusion reactors and, high-level mathematics. It's also poets and yoga instructors and linguists. And they're out there doing amazing things. And they're full, complete, happy human beings. And I'm really happy that we've had an opportunity to be part of their lives.
I love those stories. I mean, I think, and I believe this is the case for all differently wired kids. They have such incredible gifts to share with the world. And so it's always inspiring to hear what's possible when kids are, again, supported for who they are and they're allowed to learn the way that they learn and to feel good about themselves, to not feel like the aliens in the room, but get to be really in their competency and feel secure. So super interesting. And I'm just grateful for the insights into your work with profoundly gifted children in this population, and also for the work that Davidson does. So again, listeners, check out the Davidson Institute. I will have links on the show notes pages. And Stacy and Jessica, thank you so much for sharing all this with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.